After the First World War, when the British and French and the Americans had defeated the Ottoman Empire, the British and French colonial powers had signed a secret agreement in 1916 called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And this agreement basically carved up the Middle East into spheres of influence, giving to France Lebanon and Syria, and giving to Britain Palestine, Iraq, Jordan, and parts of the Hijaz, the western coast of today, Saudi Arabia. This happened a year after the British government had signed an agreement with the Hijaz, King Hussein of the Hijaz, in well-known correspondence called the Hussein-McMahon correspondence, in which the British promised Sharif Hussein that he would have an independent Palestinian or Arab kingdom after the war if they would fight on the side of the British. Well, after making this agreement with the Hussein family back in 1915, promising an independent Arab homeland, the British then entered into these secret agreements with the French that carved the territory up into spheres of influence between them. So there's a little problem there. The year after the Sykes-Picot Agreement was signed secretly, so that people like Sharif Hussein of Mecca never knew about it until the war was over. A year after that, the British went ahead and issued what is famously known today as the Balfour Declaration. Woodrow Wilson was the president during the First World War, and people considered him a very good president, somebody who talked about self-determination for all people, somebody who went to the Paris Peace Conference after the First World War to ensure that all people would hear the opinions and the aspirations of the many people now no longer governed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, by the Ottoman Empire, by the Russian Empire. Well, Woodrow Wilson sent over a commission, and I'll just make this quick, but it's extremely important. And nobody knows about it because it is usually not in our textbooks. In 1919, during the Paris Peace Conference, President Woodrow Wilson, more because he was angry about British-French influence in the region, sent over Henry King and Charles Crane, two Americans, one the former president of Oberlin, the other a Chicago businessman, and these two people gathered an entourage around them and went through the lands of Syria, which then included South Syria, or historic Palestine, and Lebanon, parts of Jordan and Iraq. And they interviewed and polled remarkably almost 3% or 3%, if not more, of the entire population of the area. In other words, by today's standards, what they did was phenomenal. They got a very definitely representative sample of what the people of the region wanted. That's democracy. That's public opinion. And they went to YMCA organizations. They went to Christian, Muslim, and Jewish organizations. They asked questions about what the people of the region would like to have now that the Ottoman Empire had been vanquished. And in this short window of time between the beginning of the Paris Peace Conference and the redrawing of the map of Europe and the Middle East and the new order that would be established, the King-Crane Commission showed us conclusively that well over 80% of the population was firmly against any kind of colonial power coming into the region and watching over them or having some kind of tutelage over them. They considered themselves perfectly capable of ruling themselves. Imagine that. Most of the vast majority of the people in what was called the Greater Syria did not want the British or the French to come in and to control their land. One other aspect of the King Crane Commission, however, is that when the Commission and many of the members of entourage, when they went to speak to the Jewish community in Palestine, because there were Jews coming into Palestine with the first Aliyah since 1882 to settle the land. They were Zionist Jews. New pioneers, the Zionist Jewish community was also polled in the King Crane Commission. And what did King Crane find out? They found out that the Zionist population envisioned a homeland in Palestine, the boundaries being still a bit vague, in which, in the future, there would be no Arabs. And the Arabs would be removed primarily by ways of land purchase. In other words, that they would have people in Europe and there purchase the land so that eventually a Zionist homeland or a Jewish homeland could be established, and it would be Arab-free. That the 46% of Palestine offered to the indigenous population of Palestine included the least cultivable land, the worst arable land. It excluded a whole portion of the seacoast. It gave them primarily deserts. Whereas the Zionist population in the partition resolution, the Zionist population in Palestine at that time owned 6% of the land through absentee landlords. And yet the United Nations awarded them 54% of this land. And contrary to common belief, the Zionists were not in favor of the partition resolution. They opposed it as a little tiny country surrounded by hostile enemies, attacking it repeatedly, trying to attack it, trying to push it into the sea. This is the common phrase that many people grow up hearing. And if you look carefully at historical documents, what you find is that Israel, what became the state of Israel, was never attacked. Not until 2006 by Hezbollah in retaliation for the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Now people say, wait a minute, you got your history wrong. What about 56? What about 1967? What about 1973? Egypt started that war. That's true. Egypt started the 1973 war. But the Egyptians did not attack Israel. The Egyptians rolled their forces into the Sinai Peninsula, which was occupied Egyptian land. And that's where the majority of the battle was fought. Israel was never invaded and attacked. Israel's forces were always superior to the forces of the combined Arab and other countries. Knew full well that the Israelis, the Zionists, had the upper hand militarily. They certainly did in 1967. That was a preemptive war that may never have needed to take place. Israel attacked Egypt